Send your scariest workplace stories to us at eeriecast.com/submit and rate and review Tales from the Break Room on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Thanks.
Hi, welcome to Dead and Roasted. What can I get you?
What do you think is worse, snakes or spiders? I think snakes are cute. They yawn and drink water like some little bros. Spiders, though, they look like they'd spit in your mom's bathwater and make you drink it. Welcome back, my friends. Today I've got some stories to share featuring snakes, Native American folklore, and extremely evil people. People I wouldn't even serve coffee to. Or at the very least, they'd be getting a different kind of beans. Enjoy. These are Tales from the Break Room. The Summer of the Snake. From Charlie Tuna. Before I get too in-depth with this story, I want to say that I'm a scientist, or more specifically, a biologist. I am not prone to flights of fancy. My life is guided and governed by the scientific method. But part of that methodology is accepting what you see with your own eyes. If you see something once, you can just write it off as a case of being worn out. Maybe you didn't drink enough water. You got dehydrated. Your mind decided to play tricks with your eyes. But after you see something over and over again, well, you have to accept that you've witnessed something that was real. Now that I've said that, I want to tell you what happened to me in the summer of 2016, or as I've taken to calling it, the Summer of the Snake. The Seminole people tell a story, the legend of the Snake Clan. It's about two young hunters who go into the swamps of the Everglades, looking for food for their tribe. They split up. One of them heads into a part of the swamp that they have been expressly forbidden to enter. Their elders pleaded and warned them not to go there, but the bolder of the two boys ignored the warnings. The day after he came back, he started to transform into a snake. He hadn't listened. He'd eaten the fish and was cursed because of it. Sometimes I feel like I'm more cursed than either of these hunters. I've heard that some Native American cultures think that if you kill a snake during a rainstorm, a lightning bolt would come down and destroy your home. Snakes were said to be the physical manifestation of lightning on Earth. These myths were not in my head as I slogged through the muck on that day, even after the rain came pouring down. I heard bits and pieces of these old wives' tales. I just never believed them. And then we ran into Billy Bob. I don't know what his real name was, but I do know what he and his family did, and what happened to them afterward. Billy Bob and his clan had a habit of disrespecting and defiling any and everything that was even slightly related to the Native American tribes that call Florida their home. This is substantial. I'm not sure how many of Darkness's fans know just how many tribes call Florida home. Apalachee, Wale, Timucua, Ocali, Tocobaga, Miami, Calusa, Tequesta, and Pensacola are just a few of these tribes. Needless to say, Billy Bob and company had a wide range of people they considered targets. I don't mean that as actual targets they hunted. Then again, considering how his family behaved, maybe they did. My supervisors were very familiar with this family, and we were explicitly told to steer clear of them. My boss, in particular, told me they'd made their feelings about anyone who worked for our department unpleasantly clear. We were afraid of them, and we had good reason to be. Whenever someone went missing in the two towns near their home, they were the first ones on the suspect list, especially if the missing person was a native. But we weren't the only ones who were scared of them. The cops in the area, few in number and support, knew that if they were to go toe-to-toe with the well-armed family, they'd lose. Keep in mind the city police were armed with revolvers. The Billy Bob family had AR-15s. It was a scary scenario, one that I tried to keep out of my mind whenever I had to go out on inspection. I try to be positive and open-minded about anyone and everything, so I wonder if maybe they'd lived somewhere else they wouldn't have been so nasty. Maybe it was the darkness hiding out in that muggy terrain that had turned them into the people they were. Or maybe it was that very darkness that drew them there. Perhaps it was the predatory nature of the land that made it the perfect place for them to call home. Whenever the thought crossed my mind, I tried to push it away. Like I said, I like being happy and positive, and thoughts like that were anything but uplifting. There's as much black poison that runs throughout the swamps and marshes out near their home as there is sun and flowers. It slithers under the surface where you can't see it sneaking up on you. Out of the corner of your eye, you'll catch a flash of movement. It's here that I want to stop and say, yes, these brief scares kept me on my toes, but they did not cause me to imagine what took place later in the day. Summers in Florida are pretty oppressive. It's not the heat. Not really, it's the humidity. It turns the air into an almost solid mass, one filled with bloodthirsty mosquitoes bent on sucking out your very soul. So on this particular day, I was slathering myself in bug spray. I mean like 2 bottles worth of the stuff. No sooner did I spray some on, it was washed off by the sweat the sun burning high overhead pulled out of me in never-ending little salty rivers. "That's strange," my partner Ron said. "What's strange?" I asked. "We've been here for the past few days and have not seen the first snake. Not a single cottonmouth, rattler, not even an indigo. I can't recall the last time I've inspected this area and not seen at least one snake." For myself, I was fine with that. I've lost count of all the times I've heard the telltale rattle that threatened to send me to the emergency room. It was so bad that every time I reached down, I would cringe at the thought of a pair of fangs sinking deep into my skin. A boom pulled me out of my thoughts and back into the real world. The thunderous sound was soon followed by the rippling crackle of lightning. Just your average today in Florida. I grumbled. Sure enough, just a couple of minutes later, the thunderhead that had consumed a large portion of the sky throughout the day was dumping out buckets of cold water across the land. You'd think it would be a welcome relief, and in a way it was. But given how hot we were, it was also jarring. The fact it slapped the cigarette I was smoking clean out of my mouth didn't help improve my mood. Nothing about this place was pleasant. Well, that's not entirely true. Normally, when it gets ready to rain, the most wonderful breezes and winds provide a comforting warning of the approach of a brutal downpour. This day wasn't like that. Everything was twice as harsh and shocking as it usually was. As the storm grew worse, we took cover in the back of our SUV. Ron wanted to move further into the tree line down a nearby dirt road, but this would have placed us dangerously close to Billy Bob's home. I wasn't having it. "Ron, we're in a truck with the department's logos plastered all over it. I don't want to get any closer to those people than we have to." After a moment's consideration, he saw the wisdom in my words. "Yeah, you're probably right." The skies darkened. Outside of the occasional flicker of lightning, the world had grown black. Black and loud. The loud was brought courtesy of the thunder that is so typical of the summers in the Sunshine State. But on that day, the rain, thunder, and lightning could not hold a candle to the terror brought by the wind. At least, not to me. Ron didn't seem to notice, but the wind was whipping the tall grass into waves. Waves where tiny thin forms were moving with, a sense of purpose. I strained my eyes, assuring myself the weather was playing tricks with the light. At first, I just saw one, then another, and another. There were snakes moving through the grass, and they were everywhere. We looked back toward the line of orange clay and watched in horror as waves of blacks and mottled greens invaded both sides of the muddy path. They just kept coming. More and more of the reptiles slid out of the grass and onto the road. They all seemed to be heading out towards the house in the marsh. Ron and I assured each other that they were just trying to escape the flood that was certainly on its way. But we both knew better. This was not natural. As our inspection went on over the next few days, we forgot about it. Or maybe we didn't. Maybe we just willfully chose to push it to the back of our minds. We got a visit from the local police chief a couple of days later. It was the final day of our inspection, and we were looking forward to putting as much distance between us and that god-awful family as possible. But then we heard what happened. The family out in the swamp was gone. Or at least, most of them were. Billy Bob's body was the only one that had been recovered. From what the chief said, it was blackened and covered in blisters. I had to find all this out secondhand. The chief didn't want to discuss this with me as he was from the old school and felt things like this should not be discussed in front of a lady. So I had to sit and watch him relay everything to someone who I technically outranked. Thankfully, Ron wasn't from the old school, so he told me all about it. The chief had told Ron that his deputies had responded to a well-being check requested by one of the family's relatives after they had not heard from them about an event they'd been planning. What the police found defied any rational explanation. The door had been bashed in. That was a galactic understatement to the actual scene. It was as if two great hands had bashed the door down and pushed out the walls on either side, leaving thick splinters of wood scattered throughout the house. Those investigating the scene even found huge shards of wood embedded in the walls. Whatever had attacked them hadn't just walked in. From what they could tell, their assailant had pulled itself along the floor. Now, the sheriff didn't say this. What he said was there was a substantial inward-facing hole in the wall, and his people couldn't find any footprints. Just a single filthy smear from the entity pointing all the way to the shattered remains of the homeowner's body, then back toward the end of the home. Another massive hole opened the dilapidated pit up to the muggy swamp air on the other side of the home. Must have created one heck of a breeze. They found Billy Bob's body midway through. His corpse was covered in dried orange mud. One of the many pieces of wood that had been torn free was just jutting out of the patriarch's mouth. Some of the other details Ron shared with me made me wish he thought I was the dainty little lady the veteran police officer thought I was. Whoever or whatever it was that had punched a hole clean through the house had dug up what had been buried in the backyard. It was every bit as bad as we'd assumed. They discovered human remains along the path of destruction the thing had left in its wake. There were 3 the police had discovered so far, but they suspected there were more. The whole story was so terrifying, so surreal. We were a stone throw away from people who hated us, and these people had apparently killed others before. We could have easily ended up buried in that stinking yard. The thought caused a cold shiver to run up my spine. It looked like the swamp had broken into that house and put all of them out of our misery. I shouldn't put things that way, but that family had hurt a lot of people. Several months later, we were back in the same neck of the woods on another regularly scheduled inspection. It was autumn, so it was a few degrees cooler then. But things had obviously changed. Even Ron noticed it. It wasn't just the fact that it was a little less molten outside. It was the entire vibe of the place. It felt, and I know this is awful to say, but it felt cleansed. Something dark and dangerous had passed over and through the land and taken the foulness with it. We've been there several times since. The old homestead has now all but collapsed back into the earth. Many things have changed since that time. I'd like to say that I'm no longer afraid of snakes, but that would be a lie. I'm still scared of them. But now they've gained my respect, and, in an odd way, my appreciation. Babysitting gone wrong. From Silver Fox 204. I was 17 years old and would babysit for a family I knew extremely well. My younger sister was friends with the little boy of that family. I'll call him Chris for the sake of privacy. I absolutely adored Chris's younger sister, Lily, which is the main reason their mother had asked me to babysit for them. I was honestly excited, as I really enjoyed spending time with both kids. Their mom was going out to dinner with friends, and she wouldn't be home until much later in the night. The night of babysitting approached, and everything had been fine. I was playing some Minecraft with the two of them for quite a while. Later on, we ordered a pizza to share. Eventually, 9 p.m. rolled around, and that was the kids' bedtime. The excitement must have wiped them out, because they didn't fight me on it at all. Once they were both asleep in their rooms, I sat on the couch in the living room and watched Netflix. For context, behind the living room is the staircase, and that leads upstairs. So from where I was sitting, even though my back was facing it, I could see if someone was standing on the staircase. I was about halfway into an episode of my show when I then began to hear footsteps descending down the stairs. Assuming it was either Chris or Lily, I called out both of their names. No one answered. Either I'd imagined it, or it was just one of them getting up to use the bathroom. That's what I thought. I continued to watch my show until I saw something in the reflection of the grandfather clock. Right next to the TV, there was a faint outline of a little girl leaning over the railing of the stairs. I wasn't panicked at all initially. I figured it was just Lily, who had woke up. I turned from the couch to look at the stairs, only to be met with an empty staircase. There was no one there at all. I whipped my head back around to face the grandfather clock. The reflection was gone. I felt my stomach plummet, and my heartbeat started to spike. Unnerved, I paused the TV and looked back at the staircase. Nothing. Maybe the reflection had just been from the TV, and this was all in my head. That was the only plausible explanation. The only way I was going to find out for sure was if I checked both kids. Reluctantly, I got up, and I walked up the staircase. I opened the door to Chris's room to find him sound asleep. I then made my way over to Lily's room, only to find her asleep as well. I walked further into her room just to double-check, to see if she was really sleeping. She was. My heart still racing, I was just baffled. What the heck had I seen in the reflection if Lily was genuinely sleeping? I turned to leave the room only to stop dead in my tracks. There was a girl standing in the hallway. A girl who definitely was not Lily. She was sickeningly pale, wearing a white nightgown. It felt like my heart was going to come up my throat. Frozen in fear, it took me a few seconds to come back to reality, and then slam the door and lock it. My heart was pounding so fiercely, I felt like I was going to puke. I just stood there, leaning against the door for a solid minute. I was breathing heavy. That's when I heard a knock at the door, and I jumped, screaming bloody murder. "Hey, it's just me," I heard Chris say from the other side of the door. Instant relief washed over me as I opened up the door to see Chris. He just stood there, eyes wide, with this absolutely unnerved expression, clutching his little creeper stuffed animal. "What's wrong?" he asked me quietly. Lily was awake now as well, sitting up in bed with a confused look. I didn't want to scare the kids. Little kids will panic if they see an adult actually freaked out, so I lied. "I was just watching a scary movie downstairs," I told them. "When I came up to check on you guys, I guess I was just caught off guard. Sorry for waking you up." They both went back to bed, and I returned back downstairs to try and become calm again. I resumed my TV show, and I was reaching the end when I suddenly had the urge to look in the reflection once again. Big mistake. I looked back, only to see the clear face of a young girl. The same one from the hallway. She had these gaunt black eyes that bore straight into me. Without another thought, I immediately sprung off the couch and sprinted up the stairs. I scooped Lily up from the bed and yanked Chris out of his. I hurriedly looked for my car keys in my bag, hands shaking, mind yelling at me a million different things. I booked it for my car. I don't even remember if I looked down the driveway before peeling out and speeding towards my home. Chris and Lily slept in the guest room in my house that night. I texted the mom that their house had lost power that night, so I'd taken them to mine. My family was super close to theirs, so I didn't think it would be a big deal. When she came to pick them up, their mother asked me to babysit again. But I had to turn her down politely. It's not that I didn't like the kids, but there was no way in heck I was going to deal with that again. Because what even was it? A few weeks later, my sister was invited for a play date with Chris. My parents, their mom, and I were all eating lunch together when Chris and Lily's mom brought up she was looking into moving. She started to complain about hearing weird noises and seeing things by the staircase. Shock hit me like a bucket of cold water. Their mom continued, explaining that she had gone to do research on the house and had come across some unsettling things. Apparently, during the 1920s, a family with 2 daughters lived there. Their youngest had died of pneumonia, and her bedroom was the same bedroom Lily had. Previous owners of the house had complained of the same things. So, I wasn't crazy, but I would be if I ever went back to that house again. The Nurse's Nightmare. From Pumpkin Mama 2022. This story will be told from the point of view of a friend of mine, Janet. I've been a nurse since I was fresh out of college. My whole childhood, that's what I wanted to do. I work nights at a small hospital in my equally small town, and we have a small staff there. We're like a little family. In my ward, there are 2 other night shift nurses who have become my best friends. I'll call them Tawny and Jody. Tawny is my age, and we started working together here at the same time. We did some on-site training together, and we have a lot in common outside of work. Tawny is just about the sweetest person you'll ever meet. She's a small woman with a soft voice, but she's a darn good nurse. Jody is several years older than Tawny and I, and she's a seasoned pro. With her take-charge attitude and ability to remain level-headed in the most intense situations, Jody is the one we look to for advice and help. The 3 of us are an inseparable trio, and we've come to be known as the 3 Nurseketeers among the rest of the staff and the town. Our small town is one of those cozy everyone knows everyone types of situations, and nothing of any significance really happens here. Leading up to the night my story takes place, the biggest news to hit local newspapers in weeks was the Tate family's new puppy, Ripley. That being said, the events of that night obviously shook the entire town, It was 9 p.m. on the night of November 20th. Tawny, Jody, and I were putting in extra hours to account for the trip we were planning on taking for the upcoming Thanksgiving holiday. I remember it being warm for a November night. I made my way up to the nurse's station as I always did. Tawny was already there, as she usually was the first to arrive, and Jody filed in a few minutes after I did. It was around 9:30 when we officially began making our rounds. We went our own ways to tend to our respective assigned duties. It was a quiet night. What few patients were there that night were in stable condition and mostly slept all night. I didn't begin to feel off until it was nearly midnight, when I realized that, although I'd crossed paths with Tawny a few times, I had not seen Jody in a couple of hours. When I next met up with Tawny in the nurse's station for our break, I asked her about Jody. She hadn't seen her in a while either. What worried us even more was Jody's failure to show up for the break. Seeing that our patients were asleep, we decided to look for her ourselves. The hospital's hallways were dark and quiet, maybe even a little too quiet. Tawny and I went in opposite directions to cover more ground, and neither of us wanted to actually call out for Jody for fear of waking the patients, so we opted to quietly peek into each room. I had checked almost all the rooms of her patients, and what few of them were not sound asleep reported not having seen her for about an hour. This struck me as incredibly odd. Abandoning her post like this was very out of character for someone who had always been a dedicated nurse. Tawny and I met up again after searching. Neither one of us had any answers. Tawny had even checked to see if Jody had signed out, thinking that maybe she got suddenly sick and had to go home. But we found no record of that. Tawny fidgeted nervously with her hands and said, "Maybe she went downstairs to the maternity ward. She gets called there for backup sometimes." This was true. Jody had been a labor and delivery nurse for several years before taking this position. And so downstairs we went. We took extra care to be quiet in this particular part of the hospital, and stopped only briefly to share a girly smile and giggle at the sleeping newborns on the other side of the nursery glass. "So tiny," Tawny whispered as we walked away. A few more minutes of fruitless searching passed before we came to the door of the hot tub room. This was where water births were performed. The metal door, usually kept locked, was ajar. I felt this horrible feeling of dread wash over me as I inched open the door and stepped into the entrance. The actual room with the hot tub was accessed by two doors, the first being the metal one we'd already come through, and the second being a glass door. My heart sank as my gaze landed on the glass door. There were handprints all over it on the inside, and the room was so steamy the once clear door looked almost white. Tawny pointed nervously to the thermostat that controlled the tub, and I saw that it was turned to maximum heat. Not a word was said between us before we began to frantically try to pick the lock on the glass door, steam pouring out like smoke from a witch's cauldron as the door finally cracked open. Tawny nearly tackled me to yank the door open, and the heat and steam hit us in the face instantly. It reminded me of opening an oven and feeling all the moist, hot air blast you in the face. We rushed into the room, having to feel our way around in the thick steam until the majority of it escaped out the open door. Once the haze cleared, I caught sight of a figure lying sprawled out on the floor. "Tawny," I called, crouching down to find that it was Jody. Tawny screamed, but quickly regained her composure to help me hoist up our unconscious coworker and carry her out into more breathable air. Jody's skin was red and inflamed, and she was soaking wet, scrubs and all. She wore angry bruises on her upper arms in the shape of handprints. But despite this, she was alive. Her chest rose and fell frantically as soon as the air was more suitable to breathe. When she opened her eyes, they were wide and fearful, and she began to struggle to string words together as we helped her to her feet. I could not make out much of what she was trying to say, but I did get a few weak, raspy words. Trapped. Water. Scalding. Couldn't breathe. Tawny and I shared a wide-eyed look. What in the horror movie is happening here? Tawny breathed, adding a bit of humor to the situation, but it was also a very valid question. What was happening here? Who had done this to Jody? We hurried back to the nurse's station, fully intending to call the police. But as we started up the stairs, we heard rapid footsteps approaching the staircase door. Injured as she was, Jody broke into a full sprint and we were right on her heels. It was jarring to see Jody, our mentor, usually so calm and sure of herself, take off running in fear like a spooked rabbit. Not that I blamed her one bit, but Jody had always been the stand-your-ground type. Not tonight, though. She noped out, and so did Tawny and I, locking ourselves in the nurse's station and dialing 911. Tawny tried to get a hold of the other staff, but could not get a response. I had never felt more alone in my life. There weren't many of us working at the small hospital that night to begin with, but now what few were there were nowhere to be found. Just us three ladies, trapped alone. That was an unsettling thought, to say the least. I'll never forget the look of pure terror in Jody's eyes as she searched the nurse's station for a weapon. She found a scalpel and told the two of us to grab a hammer or a large wrench from the connected storage closet. We did as we were told, as we always did when Jody gave us an order. Armed with her scalpel, Jody looked a bit less afraid and a bit more angry, even defensive. We waited there, huddled together in the nurse's station for what felt like hours. We'd heard heavy footsteps pacing up and down the hallway intermittently the whole time, but when the cops arrived and searched the hospital, they found nothing. No person, no scalding water in the tub, and the water had been emptied and the temperature turned down. The officer we spoke to claimed that the tub didn't even seem wet on the bottom. I could tell they didn't believe our story, but when they saw Jody's injuries, they took us a bit more seriously, even searching the hospital again. But they came up empty-handed. To this day, we have no idea what happened that night. The town was warned of an attempted murder and informed that the suspect had never been found. But the truth was, there never really was a suspect. Jody had never seen a perpetrator. She said she'd been grabbed from behind and dragged into the tub room while she was in the maternity ward, while she was taking a quick break to take a peek at the nursery babies, as she often did. The three of us are still working at the hospital, reassured by added security measures that were put into place after the incident. We try not to let the memories get to us, but Jody never really has been exactly the same. She isn't the confident, fearless woman she once was. She's jumpier now, and does not like to make her rounds alone. And you know what? Who can blame her? Creepy Encounters in the Elementary School. From The Spooky Welder. A few years ago, I worked as a janitor at an elementary school. I was on the night shift, so 90% of the time it was just me and my coworker. Sometimes a few teachers would stay behind, but they were usually gone by 5 or 6 p.m. When I first started there, I was told that the school was haunted. The old part of the building definitely gave off a spooky vibe. I had a few short encounters over the year I worked there, in no particular order. First, all the lights and toilets for the school restrooms and classrooms were motion activated. A lot of times the lights would randomly come on, or the toilets would flush in the dark bathroom. My coworker once even put stuff over the toilet sensors so that no random shadows would trigger them, but somehow they would still flush. Another time the school was running an after-school daycare, and all the kids didn't get picked up until about 6. The kids had a bunch of toys and electronics that they played with in the room. One night, not too long after the last kid left, I heard a noise that sounded like one of those piano toys, which plays a little tune over and over whenever you click a button. I figured it had been left on, so I went into the room to look for it, but couldn't find it. It didn't even sound close, so I left the room and followed the noise. Eventually, I heard it inside an empty storage room, a room that no one had been in and only I had the key for. As soon as I unlocked the door and walked into that dark and empty room, which admittedly I was a little scared of something jumping out at me, it all went quiet. I turned on the lights and looked around. There was absolutely nothing in there that could have been making that noise. It was just an empty room with a few tables and a bookshelf. The last encounter I'll mention is the creepiest, in my opinion. It was late at night, around 9 p.m. I was on one of my last rooms. Now, I know there were absolutely no children in that room. Now, I knew there were absolutely no children in the school. No teachers either. It was just me and my coworker. And my coworker was on the complete other side of the building, far away from me. I was sweeping, and I'd stopped for a moment to move some chairs out of my way that some of these students had not put up on the table, like they were supposed to. As I was stacking the chairs, from behind me, I heard a child's voice. "Hello?" I immediately froze, because suddenly hearing a voice in an empty room startled me. A second later, the voice spoke again. It asked, "Can you hear me?" After it spoke, I turned around, looking confused and creeped out. I answered the voice, "Who's there? Are you okay?" But I didn't get a reply. I looked around to see if there was anything that could have made the noise, but again, I found nothing. I rushed through cleaning the rest of that room, then ran out pretty fast across the building to ask my coworker if she was messing with me. I found her in another classroom, dancing around, singing while mopping. So at this point, I was pretty sure it was no prank. She was never much of a prankster anyway. Later that night, after all the rooms were clean, we would walk the halls together and shut off all the lights, lock down all the doors, and make sure we didn't miss any piles of dirt anywhere before we left. As I drove off, the room where I'd heard the voice was facing the road, and as I passed it, the lights came back on. Now, that could have possibly been from a shadow made by my car, but of all the nights I've driven by it, that had never happened before. So again, it creeped me out. These definitely aren't the most terrifying encounters on the planet, but I do hope you enjoyed my story. Something followed my ex home from his job. From Cricket Girl 20. My ex-boyfriend had something follow him home from his job at an Amazon warehouse. We broke up back in 2018, but remained on good terms. For privacy reasons, I'll keep the location of the warehouse private, and I'll call my ex T for the story. He called me late one week and told me about some weird and scary things that had been happening at his house, like footsteps and knocks on the front door. I then asked to tell me when it all started, and this is what followed from his point of view. Earlier this week, as I was driving down the dirt road to get to work, I was lost in my own thoughts, and I suddenly saw a deer leap into the road. I swerved around it and drove off the road a little bit, accidentally driving over a roadside grave. I didn't get out to inspect the grave as I was more worried about getting to work on time. After I got home that evening, the strange things started to happen. I was sitting on the couch with Beans and Scoot, watching TV while eating dinner, when suddenly the dogs lifted up their heads. I then heard a knock at the door. I answered it, but no one was there. As I turned around, I heard another knock. I told myself that I wasn't getting enough sleep, so I called it a night and went to bed with the dogs at the foot of my bed. The next day I had off, so I slept until 10 a.m. After I woke up, I fed the dogs, and as I was cooking my own food, I thought I heard footsteps going across my living room floor. I turned around, and I saw that my dogs had lifted up their heads to the noise. I looked all around the house, but I couldn't find any sign of anyone or anything. So I convinced myself I was hearing things, even though I know Beans and Scoot had heard it too. Later that day, I decided to mow the yard. After finishing, I brought the lawnmower back to my shed. As I looked towards the driveway, I thought I saw a man walking to my porch. I then heard Beans and Scoot going crazy, so I booked it back to the house. But when I got to the front porch, there was nobody there. I know for sure I saw someone, and that my dogs had seen someone. I literally thought my dogs and I were going crazy. I didn't get much sleep that night. The next day at work, I was in the break room drinking some water when I saw a man in the corner, a man who looked angry. I could see right through him. I closed my eyes thinking he wouldn't be there when I opened them. Suddenly, I felt a hand on my shoulder and I heard my boss's voice. "T." I opened my eyes. It was my boss, asking if I was okay. I looked back at the corner. The man was gone. My boss said to me, "Look, T, you look very tired. I think you need to get some rest. We don't really need you in today. Want me to put you down for sick leave?" I agreed and drove home. I fed my dogs dinner, ate a sandwich, and went to sleep. I woke up about 4 hours later to Beans and Scoot barking like mad. I then saw a man in my hallway. The dogs were growling and snarling, but the man just stood there. I was petrified, and the dog's hair was standing up. I managed to say to him, "What do you want?" The man pointed towards the front door, towards the road. I suddenly remembered the roadside grave, which I had accidentally run over. I threw on my shoes, grabbed my keys, and got the dogs in the car. I drove to the spot, all the while apologizing. As I tried to tidy up the grave and do what I could to make amends, I said, "I'm so sorry. I didn't do this on purpose. I truly am sorry. Please leave us alone." I drove back home, and nothing else has happened since. The dogs haven't reacted to any weirdness anymore, and I'm able to sleep at night. After he finished his story, I asked him, "Now do you believe in ghosts?" He couldn't deny it now. These days, T pays attention to the road, and he stops by that grave every so often to say a few words and to put a flower there. NAC Years, from Ken B. III. When I was between the ages of 18 through 22, I worked in a resident home as a male NAC in a small town in Washington state. At first, I didn't think much about the building, outside of it being old and filled with elderly residents. As the shifts changed from getting out at 8 p.m. to now staying until 10:30 p.m. each night, I noticed more bumps and sounds that I couldn't just write off as a resident making extra noises. About a year into working in the resident home, another aide and I were charting on a computer in the hallway. We were talking about the shift together when both of us heard someone to our right calling for help down the hall. We raced down the hall, checking each room and the residents in them to make sure they weren't awake or had fallen out of bed. Upon finishing our run-through, we found all the residents were fast asleep. At first, we thought that maybe they had yelped in their sleep, but as we got back to charting, we heard it again, but louder. Once more, we raced down that hall, thinking for sure someone had fallen this time. And yet, we found nothing. So we went back, a bit more chilled by the happenings. Weeks later, a newer female coworker requested that I help carry the garbage outside, as it was quite dark and creeped her out. And then, from down the hall, I watched as her scrubs rose and fell over her right shoulder. She freaked out and began to flail about. As I got down the hall to help, we talked about it and even laughed nervously, until she mentioned feeling a sting at her back. We looked, and a long scratch had appeared from the base of her neck to nearly her lower back. She quit within a week after that incident. A year or so later, a very religious man passed away. We all missed him due to his constant prayers for all the staff and residents. On the night of his passing, I went into his room to strip the sheets and help clean the room before the night shift showed. As I entered, all the cabinets and bed frame began to shake and rattle at a ferocious rate. I quickly left and did not clean it. On a handful of occasions, I had something out of nowhere swat me in the head or back. Not painful, but definitely odd. I left not much longer after all this, and the resident home closed soon after. The 30 minutes that turned into 5 hours. From Anna. Hello from Brazil. I was a volunteer in a social community center back in 2003. I had just graduated from high school, so I had lots of free time at hand and no money for college. From Monday to Friday, I used to walk about 10 minutes from home to get there. I would spend 4 to 6 hours helping the center's social worker. Most of the time, I dealt with reports and other documents from the social assistance area, because the social worker, I'll call her Jane, was not very good with computers. This community center was run by 3 Marist brothers, who lived in their own 2-story house that was separate from the center, with a small gate in between, which was always open. At the center, we had classes in politics, philosophy, health, marketing, environment, physical education, psychology, and IT in a program that served 400 teenagers daily. I'd been one of those teens myself 2 years before, and the IT classroom was what gave rise to the facts I'm going to narrate now. The afternoon classes ended at 5 p.m., so at 5:30 p.m., there was no one left in the place, and the center was closed to be opened again at 8 a.m. the following day. Everything went well for months, until the day I was asked to stay late, due to a report that Jane needed to present the next morning. After thinking for a moment, I ended up accepting it, because she said it would take only 30 minutes, then she would give me a ride home. I didn't really have any plans or commitments that night, so why not? Well, looking back, this proved to be a really bad idea. What should have been 30 minutes turned into 5 hours, give or take. 5 long and scary hours for me. All the students, volunteers, and other staff members went on home. It was just me, Jane, and the center's doorman. The work on preparing the report, which should have lasted only half an hour, which we finished at 7 p.m. As far as I remember, this happened at the beginning of August, when it's winter here in Brazil, and by this hour it was already very dark outside. I had just turned off the computer and was picking up my backpack when I started hearing unfamiliar, excited voices coming from the main entrance. Turns out, the doorman had been captured by 4 armed men. When Jane and I went out to see what was going on, guy number 1 was dragging the poor doorman towards the administration office, demanding the keys to the driveway and to the IT classroom. Their plan was to steal the computers from the IT room. Guy number 2 held me and Jane at gunpoint, while guys 3 and 4 searched the center's rooms for other people. I couldn't believe what was happening. After getting the keys they wanted, and seeing that there was no one else in the building, The four men gathered back at the entrance, and at gunpoint, made Jane, John the doorman, and I go through the gate and to the house of the brothers, who immediately surrendered. The men trapped us in a tiny room used to store brooms and cleaning materials. From there, we heard a quick talk between the men, deciding that one of them would stay in the house to prevent us from escaping and running away, while the other three would get the computers from the IT classroom. After some time sitting silently, we heard footsteps of the guy who was taking care of us around the house, probably looking for valuables. At that point, we exchanged a few words, making sure no one was hurt. Then we remained quiet for the rest of the time. I think everyone was saying a silent prayer, like I was. There was nothing we could do anyway. No one had a cell phone with them, and truth be told, this was more than 20 years ago. Cell phones were pretty expensive around these parts, and few people could afford one. On top of that, the service would have been terrible back then, so I guess they wouldn't have really been helpful. Time passed, and after what seemed like ages, we heard the house's landline phone ring, and we heard taking care of us guys' footsteps coming down the stairs. I don't know if he ever answered the phone or if it just stopped ringing, but after a moment, the phone began to ring again. By this time, I guess the guy probably thought it would be suspicious for him to answer the phone, so he needed one of us to. By the second ring, the door to the room we were in cracked open, and I was pulled away. Lucky me. He locked the door behind us and dragged me to the living room to answer the phone. I said hello a couple of times, but no one replied. I told him that, and he told me to hang up. Then he pointed the gun at me again, making me walk around with him all over the place, while he looked in each room and through all the cabinets. At one point, we went upstairs, and he pushed me to sit in an armchair, saying, "If you try to get up, I'll kill you." Then continued his search through all the closets and drawers. I sat there scared to death. I was just trying to keep away the tears, afraid that my crying would annoy him. I was so scared. I was only 18, and that was the very first time that something like this ever happened to me. Unfortunately, it was not the last. That's a story for another time. Anyway, some more time passed when we began to hear commotion downstairs. He left the room and ran down the stairs. He never told me to go with him, so I remained sitting there, frozen with fear. The next thing I saw about 10 to 15 minutes later were 2 police officers entering the room. I breathed a sigh of relief. They asked if I was okay and took me downstairs where another officer was talking to the Marist brothers, Jane and John. I heard them saying that 3 men had managed to escape, but their van, full with the computers from the IT classroom, had not been taken with them. After a ton of questions from the officers, I was taken home. It was about 10 p.m. My mother was already desperate due to the lack of news, and I think seeing her daughter arriving in a police car was not the best thing to calm her down. The officers explained to her what had happened, and she gave me one of these healing everything hugs that moms are specialized in. I really needed one of those. I took a long hot shower, finally crying all those tears I was too scared to cry before. I had dinner and went to bed. I remember that falling asleep was really hard that night, due to all the stress and fear I'd gone through. The next day, I was still feeling pretty uncomfortable, but I went to the center again, because I'd overheard the officers saying that we would be asked to give our official statements at the police station. I don't know exactly what happened at this point, but the social worker told me I wouldn't have to go to the station with them. Even so, I had to repeat the story over and over again, because there were a lot of curious employees and students. I continued to work as a volunteer at this community center. After all, that place was really dear to me. I had lots of good memories, and I thought that I couldn't allow one bad event ruin everything, even though it was really bad to me. The brothers offered me some counseling or therapy, but I declined. I just wanted to leave everything behind. The IT classes were suspended for a while. There were some renovations made and the security was increased before everything came back to normal. Some weeks passed, and by the middle of October, I was hired at the place. It was my first job, and I worked for months at the management office. The general opinion was that a neighbor saw the unusual movement that day and called the police. But we never really knew who this blessed person was. I don't know if the other guys were caught later. I never really cared to ask. And needless to say, I have never stayed there after 5 p.m. again. Not even for 30 minutes more. Sometimes I think I should have accepted the therapy. Because to this day, I still get uncomfortable around guns. But of course, now it's a little too late. Thanks for tuning in to Tales from the Break Room, the home of the scariest true work stories. If you want to hear your story narrated by me, send it to me at eeriecast.com/submit. We pay 5 cents per word for accepted stories. Help us grow by leaving Tales from the Break Room a rating and review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And be sure to follow us on your favorite podcast app. Check out eeriecast.com or search for EerieCast on those very same podcast apps to see our other exciting and terrifying podcasts, like Unexplained Encounters, the other show I host, where I read stories with a focus on the supernatural. To get some merch, go to eeriecast.store. And to unlock ad-free episodes of your favorite EerieCast shows and exclusive audiobooks, go to eeriecast.com/plus and consider signing up for EerieCast Plus. You can follow me on Twitter, I guess it's X now, @DarkPrevails. You can also subscribe to me on YouTube, where I deliver the same content. Just look for Darkness Prevails. Good night. I hope we can share another break sometime soon.